Number 22, this is page 8. Which function represents the sequence? There are 3 ways to do this, okay? The first thing that you need to notice is what's going on in the sequence. Okay, so what's going on? To get from the first term, which is 3, to the second term, which is 10, what did they do? They added 7. Did that pattern continue the entire time? Yes. 10 plus 7 is 17. 17 plus 7 is 24. 24 plus 7 is 31. So to move from one term to the next, they added 7. Now, that makes this an arithmetic sequence. Anytime you have to add or subtract by the same number every time, that's known as an arithmetic sequence. On your formula sheet, which I'll give you in a few minutes, okay, listen, you're going to receive a formula sheet during the test, and I'm going to give you a copy of it in a few minutes. That way you can go ahead and become familiar with what's on it. It gives you the formula for an arithmetic sequence. It's a sub n equals d times n minus 1 plus a sub 1. D stands for common difference. What is the common difference here? 7, because each time they're going up by 7. So your D is a positive 7. Then n minus 1 plus a sub 1 is the first term. What's our first term? Our first term is 3. Then you would just simplify by distributing. So that becomes 7n minus 7. Oops. Not 4, 7. And then you would combine like terms. Aren't the like terms negative 7 and 3? So won't that simplify to 7n minus 4, which is b? Now, I'm aware that even though this formula is going to be given to you on the formula sheet, many of you will forget to use it, or you'll forget how to use it. There's a second way to do this called the cheat method of the explicit formula. Instead of having to remember a sub n equals all that, you can remember a sub n equals dn plus a sub 0. D is always your common difference, so whatever it's going up or down by goes in D. Since it's going up by 7, you would put 7 in the D place, so 7n. A sub 0, think about it. The first term is 3, so 0 would be the 0th term. If we went backwards following this pattern, the 0th term would have been what? Negative 4, because if we went 3 and then down 7, backwards, it would take us to negative 4, 7n minus 4, 7n minus 4. So that's kind of like a shortcut method if you can remember that the D always goes by the n and then you just add the 0th term. Now there is another option. Say you can't remember any of those or how to use this one. You should remember it because it'll be on the formula sheet. But there is another option. Let me show you it. They've given you 4 different equations, and each of those equations have an n. Well, they've given you n values of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Pay attention. If I were to plug in a 1 for the n place, what is 1 plus 3? Which is not 3. So that tells me right away A's equation does not work. Now let's look at B. If I plug in 1 for the n place, what's 7 times 1? 7 minus 4 is 3. Okay, so it worked for that one. So let's try the next coordinate. If I plug in 2, 7 times 2 is 14, and 14 minus 4 is 10. So it worked for that one. Then I would plug in 3. 7 times 3 is 21 minus 4 is 17. Okay? 7 times 4 is 28. 28 minus 4 is 24. 7 times 5 is 35. 35 minus 4 is 31. That's another way you could do that. Just work through each of the equations by plugging in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the n places and seeing which equation produces those 5 numbers. Does that make sense? Does everybody feel like they could do it one of those 3 ways? Okay, number 23. Each week, Tim wants to increase the number of sit-ups he does daily by 2 sit-ups. The first week, he does 15 sit-ups each day. Write an explicit function in the form f of n equals mn plus b to represent the number of sit-ups f of n Tim does in a week. Well, first of all, we need to create a list because this is an arithmetic sequence. What number would be first in your list? 15, because didn't he start his exercise routine by doing 15 sit-ups each day for the first week? So if he's increasing that by 2 sit-ups each week, how many sit-ups will he do every day the next week? 17. Then the next week he'll be doing how many a day? 19, then 21, then 23, and so on. Okay, so there's your arithmetic sequence. But we don't have like equations that we can just plug in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to see which ones produce these numbers. So for this one, you are going to have to remember the cheat method, or the explicit formula will be on your formula sheet. A sub n equals dn plus the 0th term. That's the cheat method. What is the d? Guys, d is common difference, which means what they're going up or down by. And they're going up 2, so it's a positive 2. And then a sub 0 is 0th term. If we'd have gone backwards to the 0th term, it would have been at 13. So there's your equation. Isn't 2n plus 13 in that form? Yes? Yes, Samantha? We did. Well, I taught you the real formula. A sub n equals d times n minus 1 plus a sub 1. But this is like a little cheat method if you can remember it. No, you don't have to do this if you can remember this. This will be given to you on the formula sheet though. This will not. So you have to remember that. You have to remember that beside the n is what they're going up or down by. And at the end of it is the 0th term. So if you went backwards, whatever that would be. Well, we're supposed to teach, like, the formula. But, like, we teach all different methods because sometimes you don't have multiple choices. So, like, we might not be able to teach a method like I just showed you where you can just plug in. You know what I mean? So that's why we have to teach multiple methods. Okay, can I move on now? Okay, number 24. Look at this sequence in the table. Which function represents the sequence? Now, while I was teaching this unit, you not only learned the explicit formula, you also learned the recursive formula. And that's what these choices are, the recursive formula. You just have to decide which one is the right recursive formula. Well, this is kind of a common sense question. From the first term to the second term, what happened? They added 2. Did that pattern continue? Yes. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 2 is 7. So even if you have no clue anything about the recursive formula, but that's all you notice is that they're each going up by 2, which one would you circle? B, which is correct. You add 2. Okay, so try not to overthink some of these things. Just use common sense. All right, number 25. Consider this pattern. Which function represents the sequence that represents the pattern? Okay, well, if you had this question, what would you do first? The common difference. Well, to do that, you kind of have to know, like, how many are in each pile, right? How many snowflakes are in that first pile? 6. How many are in this one? And how many are in this one? So what's the common difference? A positive 3. Well, A is obviously wrong because it's minus 3, and so is C. So is it B or D? Are they multiplying by 3 and adding 3? No, just adding 3. Okay, next page. Shh. Be quiet. Which function is modeled in this table? Okay, this is also a question where you could use the explicit formula and plug into the D and to the A sub 1 and simplify. Or if you don't want to do that, you could use the cheat method formula, which is what? Tell me. A0. Okay, well, the first term was 8, the second term was 11, the third term was 14, the fourth term was 17. So what's the common difference? Where does it go in this formula? The D. Okay, what they're going up or down by will always be beside the end. Think about it. It's the like slope, right? This is like slope. Correct, but how would it have been 5? Because the previous one, had you gone backwards to the 0th term, you would have gone down 3 and it would have taken you to 5. Now, what is our other option to solve a problem like this if we can't remember how to do the explicit formula or the cheat method of it? Okay, that is the third option. Like if you look at A and you take a 1, which is an x value, and plug it in. What's 1 plus 7? Okay, so it works so far. But now let's plug 2 in that same thing. What's 2 plus 7? Which is not 11. So this one, even though it worked for the first coordinate, it didn't work for the second one. Y'all got to focus. This test is not easy at all. 3, we already know this is the right answer. So now let's try plugging in that one. If I plug in a 1 for the x, what's 3 times 1? Plus 5, 8. If I plug in a 2, 3 times 2 is, plus 5 is. If I plug in a 3, 3 times 3 is, plus 5 is. And if I plug in a 4, 3 times 4 is, 12 plus 5 is. You should not miss questions like that. You have 3 different ways to answer it. All right, number 27. Which explicit formula describes the pattern in this table? Okay, well, it's kind of harder to notice the pattern in this table because the whole decimal thing throws you off. But if you start by looking at your choices, choice A says that D equals 3.14 times C. Well, if we use our first coordinate, okay, let's just focus in on the first coordinate. The D value of the first coordinate is 2. The C value of the first coordinate is, 6.28. See how I just plugged in 2 in the D place, 6.28 in the C place? Does that make sense? 2 equals 3.14 times 6.28? No, it'd be much larger than 2. So A is out. B says 3.14 times C equals D, which is what? Isn't it the same thing as A? They just wrote the D at the other end? So it's wrong. C says 3.14 times 10 equals C. Well, what's 31.4 times 10? 31.4 times 10. Okay, so it says that 31.4 times 10 equals C, and that's 314. Are there any numbers on here that are 314? No. So now let's look at D. D says that the C value equals 3.14 times the D value. Well, if you just focus in on that first coordinate, the D value is 2. The C value is 6.28. Does that make sense? Isn't 3.14 times 2 really 6.28? And think about it. Wouldn't 3.14 times 3 be that? And 3.14 times 5 is that? And 3.14 times that D value is that. So it's D. Okay, number 28. If f of 12 equals 4 times 12 minus 20, which function gives f of x? Anybody? Samantha. So, what answer do you think is correct? I think it is C. Let's talk about why. Okay, listen. They give you this, and then they say which function gives f of x. So haven't they now, instead of f of 12, written f of x? So doesn't that mean they're just taking the 12 away and putting x? So that means we should take this 12 away and put x, and you end up with 4x minus 20. It's that easy. Oh. They're basically just asking you to take the input out. The input is 12. They're saying remove it, and what was the original equation? Okay, next page. A wild horse runs at a rate of 8 miles an hour for 6 hours. Let y be the distance in miles the horse travels for a given amount of time, x, in hours. This situation can be modeled by a function. Which of these describes the domain, keyword domain, of the function? When you hear the word domain, you immediately think what? X. Now look at your choices and tell me what can be eliminated. Correct, because both of those have a y. Those would both be range. Now tell me what else you know about x in terms of this word problem. Just tell me what you know about x. Read through it and tell me something they tell you about x. X is in hours. So, are we looking, or can this horse run from 0 to 6 hours or 0 to 48 hours? 0 to 6 hours. Does that make sense? Guys, look, the wild horse runs at a rate of 8 miles an hour for 6 hours. So his maximum time is 6 hours. He runs between 0 hours and 6 hours. Well, I mean, hopefully yes, but sometimes word problems don't always make sense. Okay, number 30. To rent a canoe, the cost is $3 for the oars and life preserver, plus $5 an hour for the canoe. Which graph models the cost of renting a canoe? Okay, well, first let's write an equation in y equals mx plus b form. What would the equation look like? 5x would be, 5 would be your m, because that's what you're paying per hour. And then plus 3, because you do have a one-time fee just to rent the oars and the life preserver. So when you graph something like y equals 5x plus 3, what gets graphed first? The b, which is 3, because that's the m. And where does the b go on the graph? The y-intercept, the y-axis. Well, this one has a y-intercept of 0. This one has a y-intercept of 5. And this one has a y-intercept of 5. This one you can see hits the y-axis a little below 5, which would be 3. So it's C. Alright, next page. Juan and Patty decided to see who could read more books in a month. They began to keep track after Patty had already read 5 books that month. This graph shows the number of books Patty read for the next 10 days and the rate which she will read for the rest of the month. Okay, so the graph is all about Patty. Okay, so beside it I'm going to write Patty. If Juan does not read any books before day 4, and he starts reading at the same rate as Patty for the rest of the month, how many will he have read by day 12? So tell me some things you notice. Something more obvious. Just tell me anything you know. It doesn't. Okay, look. Okay, look. If I know this is Patty's rate, represented by this line, couldn't I find her rate of change by calculating the slope? So if I started here, and then if I followed the line up to the next, now I don't want to go to this point, and let me tell you why. Because if that's 5 and that's 10, isn't this number 7.5? And do you really want to deal with a decimal? Okay, so maybe go up to the next nice whole number, which would be up to 10 over to 4. So how many does she have to rise to get from this point to this point? Y'all, from 5 to 10 is how many books? 5 books. And then she runs how many? 4, because that's from 0 to 4, and that's what? Days. So she reads 5 books every 4 days. Okay? So she's reading like 1 1/4 book per day. Tell me some things they told you about wine. Okay, so he doesn't start reading until day 4. And what? Okay, but tell me what else they told you besides the fact that he reads at the same rate. So wouldn't his rate also be 5 books every 4 days if he reads at the same rate? Well, when does he finish reading? At day 12. So if he starts reading at day 4 and he finishes reading at day 12, how many days did he read? 8 days. From day 4 to day 12 would be reading for 8 days. Well, guys, if he reads for 8 days and his rate is 5 books every 4 days, how many books will he have read at 8 days? 10. Because look, you just double it. 4 days, 5 books, so 8 days is double that, so 10 books. Does that make sense? Okay, turn to the next page. I'm now going to start the timer for 15 minutes, and you're going to be working on Unit 3, which is pages 13 through 19. Yes. No, you're going to have 15 full minutes to do as many problems as you can on pages 13 through 19. Do not come up and ask me anything. Act like it's a real test. Try to figure out what you can. Do not talk. Which expression is equivalent to 121x squared minus 64y squared? Okay, this is a binomial, but it's a special type of binomial. Does anybody remember the name of this special type of binomial? Yeah, that's on the right track, yes. What did you say? Brianna, say it out loud and maybe it'll help them. Perfect squares. You have 2 perfect squares, and you're taking the difference of them. Remember, difference of 2 squares? This is a difference of 2 squares because you're subtracting 2 things that are perfect squares. This is a perfect square because to get 121x squared, can't you just do 11x times 11x? And to get 64y squared, can't you just do 8y times 8y? So you know in your binomials, you're looking for an 11x times an 11x, which all of them have, but then an 8y times 8y, which only C and D have. Now, keep in mind that it's a difference. So when you go to double distribute this, or FOIL it, what kind of signs do you have to make a minus in the middle? Correct, which rules out C, it has to be D. Okay. Number 33, what is a common factor for the expression 24x squared plus 16x plus 144? Okay, so we want to try to factor it. If you have something like this and you're asked to factor it, what's the first thing you might try? Okay, because that number would be called the what? The greatest common factor, GCF. Well, what's the biggest number that you could divide all 3 of these by? 8. Okay, but that does not mean that 8x is the answer, because can you divide all 3 of them by an 8x? No, 144 doesn't have an x to begin with. So when we divide it, what's 24x squared divided by 8? 3x squared. What's 16x divided by 8? And what's 144 divided by 8? So the answer is C. Yeah, because even if you tried to look at D and consider that 8 has been factored out, if you went and FOILed this, is x times 3x squared 3x squared? No, it's 3x cubed. So that would make a 3x cubed, which is why D doesn't work. 34 is the same question, so now let's look at 35. Which of these shows the complete factorization of 6x squared y squared minus 9xy minus 42? If you're asked to factor something like that, what's the first thing you might try to do? Well, there are no like terms because x squared y squared and xy are different because this one's got 2's, this one only has 1's. Anytime you're asked to factor and the leading coefficient is greater than 1, you need to always check for a GCF first. Is there a number that can be factored out of all 3 of those numbers? Yeah, you can divide them all by 3. And to help you figure out that number, look at your choices. We see 3's a lot, so maybe try to pull out a 3. When you pull out a 3 out of this term, doesn't it leave 2x squared y squared? And when you pull 3 out of this, it leaves negative 3xy. And when you pull 3 out of negative 42, it leaves negative 14. Now, this was not as easy as the previous one because that's not the answer. They factored it further. But think about it. Dividing by a 3 means the GCF is a 3, and don't we write that on the outside? Well, look at A and C. Don't they have 3's written on the outside? So we're going to focus in on A and C. Well, now look. Focus. This is the last thing I'm doing today. If I try to FOIL this, 2xy squared times xy squared. 2xy squared times xy squared. Wouldn't that be 2x squared y to the 4th? Because the 1's add up to a 2 and the 2's add up to a 4. Well, is that what ours says? No. The reason C is the right answer is because when you go to FOIL this, 2xy times xy is 2x squared y squared, which is what ours starts with, so it's C. You may switch out. We'll continue tomorrow.